Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all can hear me well enough. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you had a great second day of the conference. My day went a little bit different than I thought. And whether that meant attending insightful talks or feeling satisfied with the one you gave. I have to tell you, I moved to the Netherlands 17 years ago for love. Was not particularly for the love of the food here that I stayed. I'm sorry, I'm kidding. But I didn't stay neither for the love of the weather, but look at this week. Okay, just kidding. Just before we end the academic side of the program today, we will hear the talk of Professor de Graaff. And it's a personal delight to introduce Professor Rick de Graaff. Our professional path first crossed during my PhD studies, and since then we went to numerous events, including memorable conferences in cities like New York and Chicago, where we went to very serious and interesting talks during the day at TBLT, and visited various restaurants and jazz bars at night with our Dutch group of academics, with Marjolein and Kees and Wander, Ineke, Volkert, Leslie, and others too. So this is also where I met Marije for the first time. Rick is professor of didactics of foreign languages at Utrecht University. He is also the director of the teaching education program of Dutch and foreign languages. What I find inspiring in his career is that he has led departments in both highly academic institutions and in institutions of applied sciences, combining his passion for language learning theories and his mission to improve language teaching with teachers in the classrooms. In these roles, he has actively participated in improving foreign language pedagogy and bilingual education in this country for sure. Throughout his career, Rick has made substantial contributions to the academic community and has been instrumental in advancing clear methodologies. He recently received an NWO, which is the Dutch funding agency for research, for a project on receptive multilingualism, in which the receptive communication skills in Dutch of internationals in the university are supported and researched following an EAP or ESP-like approach. I love this project because to me, variety and multilingualism is really the spice of life. Rick is highly multilingual himself and speaks Spanish fluently. I heard that it somewhat has to do with an Erasmus exchange in Barcelona, which in turn has to do with TBLT, but he will tell you all about it later. Today, he will share his insights on what makes successful task-based language teacher training, offering us a synthesis of research findings, practical strategies, and reflections. Please join me in warmly welcoming Professor Rick de Graaff.
Thank you. Dankjewel. Take it easy. And thank you for inviting me to the third happiest city in Europe. I don't know if Utrecht, my city, would be the second or the first. No, then it's definitely the fourth. But we have the highest church tower. And Groningen's church tower is the third. And we are also on a hill, a different one, but also about 4 meters above sea level. So even that doesn't make the difference. The same church tower. I would like to start by, well, with a personal story. This is the story of Faris. and I've got his permission to tell you his story and also to show you some pictures. Faris is 16 years old, and he is a refugee from Syria. When he was 6 or 7 years old, his family went to Turkey, and they lived there for a couple of years. 2.5 years ago, they came to the Netherlands, and since then, he has been learning and practicing Dutch. First 1 year in a language school, as most children do, newcomers when they come to the Netherlands. And since last year, he is in the 3rd grade of secondary pre-vocational education. I'm his language buddy, which means that once a week we meet in the public library and I help him with his homework, his language. Maybe we do tasks. I think we definitely do tasks, and I will give you some examples of those. This is in the context of the Taal doet meer program, Language Does More, Language Makes a Difference, which is an organization that, let's say, connects newcomers or other people with language challenges in their educational context to volunteers who support them. Faris wants to become an ophthalmologist, which, by the way, is a much easier word in Dutch. It's oogarts, eye doctor. But that means when he is now in 3rd grade of pre-vocational education, he has a long way to go, but he is really ambitious. A couple of weeks ago, I helped him with his biology lessons, preparing for a test. And this test actually was about vision. So it's related to his interests. He had learned lots of subject language words. But he also needed academic language words. So he could easily reproduce words like gezichtsvermogen, bijziend, verziend, optometrist, oogarts, bril, contactlenzen. But he wasn't able to answer this question. What was his problem? What is afnemen? Decrease. And in Dutch, afnemen literally would be take away as well. So he just couldn't make sense of the question. And for that matter, he wouldn't be able to pass at least this question of the test. Whereas he knew a lot about the topic and he was really interested in that topic. And his biology teacher was probably perfectly aware of the importance of the subject language terminology, but not of the school or academic language terminology that's also needed in order to understand the subject, in order to be able to answer questions that are asked on a test or other types of assessment. What did we do to further, work on to increase his language necessary for biology and for this topic? For instance, we watched video clips in informative television programs on vision. We got the chance to visit the ophthalmology section of the University Museum in Utrecht. We also got the chance to be invited at a nearby optometrist and optician, and where we get all kinds of explanation. And even so, he was able to apply for an orientation internship at that same optometrist. So he was able to write an application letter for that internship. And actually today is his very first day of this three weeks orientation internship. So maybe he will turn into an ophthalmologist someday. And all this helps to work on tasks in real life, working on what he is motivated in. In other words, I was able to help him to activate and to engage with the content on vision and the language needed to work with that content. To be challenged, to be all kinds of rich input, multimodal input, interaction opportunities, to connect with his prior knowledge because he already knew a lot about this topic, and connect that to new content and new language. To recycle this content and language in different contexts and by different modi. For instance, by this television program, by interviewing an expert. Interaction with that expert, with the teacher, with the materials in the museum. What we call globalizing between language and between subjects such as biology, but also between school and real life. He was informally assessed by reflecting on his learning process and on the topic he was interested in. We could adapt to his individual interests and maybe therefore also to his individual needs. Together we created a safe, a caring and challenging environment, which was built on curiosity and motivation. Some of you might recognize this series because these are the key principles for high quality additional language education from Van den Branden, 2022. And maybe we had an easy task because 1.5 hour quality time once a week, that's not what many teachers in a classroom with 30 students, well, would feel. Of course, you can have quality time, lots of quality time with 30 students, but being so adaptive to their needs and interests, that's quite challenging for teachers. Other questions about these key principles. Are they actually specific for language education? Or are they specific, are they relevant to any kind of teaching and learning in which language always plays a role? Are they exclusive for task-based language education? Or would they also work for non-task-based education or for tasks in other subjects, other types of education? Can I go on?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. My first TBLT experience, and I'm not sure if it was called that way already, but I was as an Erasmus student in Barcelona back in 1990, 1991. I came from what felt already a huge difference with how I was taught languages in the grammar translation method in my secondary school and a university. We had a communicative approach, which we would now call PPP. And in Barcelona, I got my first experiences with what was called the Enfoque por Tareas, with publications, early publications in Spanish already on this topic, but also I had contact with publications by Mike Long, I think already by Alice on this topic, and by others. I also had the chance to work on my language in practice, to improve my professional and my colloquial Spanish with my fellow students and during my daily life. Connecting what I learned, and that was mostly implicit because I wasn't there for a language course, I was there for a teacher education program. But at the same time, I also took the chance to sign up for a Catalan language course. And that was also, well, what I would now call task-based, and also give me the chance to practice right away in the wild, in the city, what I learned during that course. Although people would mostly answer in Spanish when I tried to speak Catalan. Okay, so from that very first experience, and then I was at the, so fast forward, at the TBLT conference in Leuven in 2005 or 2006, where some of you were also. Who of you was at that conference in Leuven? Yeah, quite a number of people, yeah. And then I attended other conferences on TBLT in Innsbruck, in Ottawa, another one in Leuven, missing one even, and now here. We still work with task definitions that are based on the, let's say, rather early ones from 20 years ago, which have been further developed and refined, but still the core is activities which focus on a non-linguistic outcome relevant in real-life settings, which also work and help to improve language acquisition. Authentic tasks and the importance of task authenticity. Learning by doing. Teaching and learning communication through communication, one of the essential aspects. In or for real life, that means for out-of-school purposes. But at the same time, and that is what I will give examples of during my talk, we can also see language subject, so language in the school subject, as content, so within the school. Language and culture in a language class can also be object of communication and can also work as a way, and also maybe a closer, feeling closer for many language teachers and relevant and important for many language teachers to work on authentic tasks and to work on communication. And I will also pay attention to the context of content and language integrated learning in the sense of content from other subjects in the school curriculum, language in other subjects in the school curriculum, and how in this way, in the school context, language can play a role in task performance and how content from those subjects can play a role in task design and task performance. Wittgenstein said, the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. But I think what we all want as language teachers, and what we also try to achieve through TBLT, is not the limitations, but the windows. The windows of my languages are the windows to my world. And I think that is what we all try to achieve, and that is why we do TBLT whenever that is relevant. Languages play a role in teaching and learning in very many different ways. Languages of education, languages of schooling, which start with the languages that are present in the learners and the different languages that they bring into the school, and also different languages that teachers bring into the school, including regional, minority, migration languages. We teach a language as a subject, and we use languages in other subjects. And this might be foreign languages or first languages or second languages. That's also interesting. We'll see what that is. Okay. So my focus during this talk is what is the role of language in content learning? And what is the role of content in language learning? And that can be in school context or daily life or professional life out of school context. That means that subject content somehow is essential when it comes to thinking about language task design in a school context. And always subject language is essential, language specific for the topic, and school language or academic language that is needed to discuss, to think about, to consider what is related to that topic. This altogether is what we call subject literacies. I will give examples of research, development, and practices here in the Netherlands when it comes to content in or from other subjects, as in content and language integrated learning, but also language subject as content. That is the use of linguistic awareness, of cultural awareness in the context of first, second, or foreign teaching and learning. Just to give some background on the educational system in the Netherlands and the role of languages within the educational system here. In the Netherlands, after kindergarten, there is 8 years of elementary school, and after these 8 years, children are streamed in 3 different secondary school levels in what we call pre-vocational, general secondary, and pre-university secondary. And these give access to vocational, to universities of applied sciences, or to universities. English is taught in elementary schools, compulsory from grade 5, from the age of 10, and many schools start earlier, from grade 3, for instance. Some start from grade 1, but it can be rather late compared to many other countries here in Europe. Dutch is the language of instruction and the language of communication in virtually all schools. French, German, some cases Spanish are taught in secondary education. Not always compulsory, but it can be electives as well. And some schools might offer other languages, but it's also only a very limited number of schools. And usually there is very little attention to pupils' home languages, to heritage languages. There is quite a considerable percentage of schools that offer a bilingual education track, a CLIL track, which will always in combination of Dutch and English. And those schools can offer up to 50% of their program through English. We have specific language support classes for newcomers, as the class that Faris was following his education during his first year. And teachers in schools with many pupils with other language backgrounds might follow a language-oriented content teaching approach that is giving specific language support to their pupils in other subjects. In foreign language teaching, when it comes to the final attainment goals and the description of the curriculum, we follow a communicative language teaching approach. But as in many other practical experiences that you also might have, in practice, I wouldn't always call this communicative. We here have the constructive alignment dilemma. The goals might be communicative, but if assessment focuses on forms, if we only assess isolated skills, and teachers want to prepare, of course, their students properly for the assessment, then pedagogy and materials will probably be more PPP oriented than task-based oriented, or than real communicatively oriented. That is, if we want to work on real communicative learning objectives, we have to make sure that assessment and feedback is really closely connected to those objectives, because only then teachers will work with materials and pedagogies that work towards reaching those objectives. This was the focus of a PhD research by Charlene Rouffet. I was one of her supervisors. She did her PhD, she completed her PhD last year. And she was focusing on transforming foreign language teaching practices through communicative classroom-based assessment programs. So starting from the communicative attainment goals, she changed the way teachers were able to assess their students' language proficiency. And this has an impact on the way they taught, the materials they used, the pedagogies they taught, etc. So together with teachers, she designed a classroom-based assessment program. And together with teachers, she used those principles to fine-tune the assessment program for the specific needs of their pupils in their schools. And what did we find? In an early inventory before this program, although on paper, in the intended, what we call the intended curriculum, the focus was on communication skills, we saw by reports from their own students that the main focus was on grammar rules and words, both in the lessons and in the tests. Whereas after taking part in the professional development program and in redesigning their communicative-based assessment program in schools, we found a clear difference. And not only in the year during this program, but also in the years after that. That is a much stronger focus on learning to communicate in the target language, a much stronger focus on the productive language skills, reading, writing, but also on speaking, and much less so on grammar rules and words when it came to assessment. In other words, this really made a difference. Working with teachers in redesigning their practices, taking them seriously, taking their context, taking their needs seriously, really made a difference. We already saw so, and she is here, Leslie Piggott, and this was her PhD thesis from 2019. She did a study in her own school under this title, First Meaning, Then Form. And what she did was getting rid of all the grammar instruction and all the grammar drills and practices during the first 2 years in the first and second year of secondary education for the English language. And what she did is having students working on real communication skills with a maybe not always task-based, but definitely a task-supported approach. And this is an example of the type of task and assessment, in this case, a writing assignment that was given to the students in year 2. And this is how the work by the students was assessed by means of this rubric, taking into account the quality of vocabulary, of grammar, and of functional adequacy. What Leslie did was studying different aspects of complexity, accuracy, and fluency. And here we see a few examples of what he found. And we see that the implicit group, who did not get any explicit grammar instruction and grammar practices, their level definitely increased during the first year, and this continued during the second year. Whereas in the explicit group, this was much less the case. Interestingly, during the last 6 weeks of the second year, what we did was giving the students, the pupils, some kind of a crash course on all the grammar that was not addressed during the 2 years so far. Because Leslie's fellow teachers in the third year didn't want to have pupils who did not have the grammatical terminology that the other pupils had. So, well, then we thought, well, let's give them a 6 weeks crash course and see what happens. And also when it came to explicit knowledge, after these 6 weeks, these students had exactly the same level of explicit knowledge of those grammar rules as the other students who had spent tens and tens of hours during those 2 years. And also in a test that we took later in year 3, we still found the same effects. So that's what we call the icing on the cake. You can just wait till later before you pay attention to grammar instruction. This is an example of the importance of giving teachers the opportunity to work as researchers in their own practices. And there are several colleagues here as well who work as teachers in secondary education, as language teachers, and at the same time do a PhD research. We have funding opportunities, and although we also have the threat of budget cuts here, we still have funding opportunities for teachers to do a part-time PhD, which is in the context of what we call DUDOC Alpha. Not only for language teachers, it's for teachers in all the humanities, also in history, for instance. And at the moment, over 50 teachers have worked or are still working on subject pedagogical, usually design-based research programs in order to improve their own practices and at the same time being an example, evidence-based example for other teachers in the field. They are experienced teachers, sometimes also teacher educators, who then have other fundings from the University of Applied Sciences, who usually get 4 years of 60% research time. So they always work for usually 2 days a week in their schools, and they have 3 days a week in which they might be replaced by other teachers that they can work on their research. And this is a quite successful program. The focus of these studies usually is on challenging education in humanities. How do we challenge our pupils in order to better reach the attainment goals of these programs? In respect to meaningfulness, and in our case, with respect to the development of language awareness and cultural awareness, but also on the range of pedagogies, practices, and outcomes of education in humanities, with a specific attention to the coherence and the integration within and between or among the school subjects. So we are quite lucky to have the chance to have people with so much experience in teaching practice to contribute to our research as a research community and to be part of that research community, and at the same time also for researchers to be part of the teaching community and work together on improvement of our understanding and of the actual practice of teaching and learning of the subjects. Okay. I will give some examples later on of other of those PhD studies. On the role of content in language learning. That is, if we consider not only communicative proficiency, but also cultural awareness and language awareness as essential components of learning a language, and therefore also essential components of the languages curriculum, then content literacies are important in order to be able to communicate about language, to communicate about culture, to understand language, to understand culture, and at the same time, through the understanding of language and culture, develop your own language proficiency. And what type of content language and what type of academic language is needed, and what type of tasking is relevant in order to develop those competencies. Over the past 2 to 3 years, new proposals have been developed for the domain of languages in the Netherlands. We are in a process of curriculum innovation for virtually all the subjects in primary and secondary education, because the actual curriculum was dated back from about 20 years. So we now have had the chance to reconsider the curriculum for the subjects, and this has been done by large groups of people from educational practice, teachers, school leaders, teacher educators, researchers, curriculum experts, etc. For the languages, both for Dutch and for the foreign languages, we do not only focus on language proficiency, but we have very clear developed proposals now for attainment goals with respect to language awareness and cultural awareness as essential content in the languages, which means we can still teach our pupils how to go to the boulangerie in France for a baguette, but at the same time, we want also them to consider cultural differences and therefore better understand their own cultural environments as essential topics within the context of learning languages. So we differentiate, we consider three different domains: the domain of communication and language proficiency, the domain of taalbewustzijn, language awareness, and cultuurbewustzijn, cultural awareness. This is at the level of the attainment goals. In the system in the Netherlands, it's the responsibility of the schools and of the teachers how they want to reach those schools with goals with their pupils. So pedagogy is not prescribed. Of course, depending on the type of textbook materials, etc., that they use, they might implicitly use and sometimes explicitly use some kind of specific pedagogical directions. But pedagogy is not prescribed by the government. Only the attainment goals are, in this case, proposed, and it will be prescribed, will be assessed in national assessments, but the way in order to reach it, that's open to teachers. That is, there the use of task-based language teaching can be considered, but it depends on the teachers, on the schools, and therefore also on teacher education institutes, what is offered in order to reach these goals. To give a few examples of those final attainment goals, and I'll give two for each of the different domains. For communication, for instance, one is that the learner purposefully acquires information from oral, written, and digital sources in the foreign language. So this is about receptive skills. Another one is to engage in conversation, in this example for English, but also for German, French, etc., which is appropriate to their purpose, to the interlocutors, to the context, and to the medium. So this relates to interaction, to writing, to speaking, but always in a specific communicative context and with a specific purpose. For language awareness, two other examples. The learner demonstrates understanding and reflects on the effect of choices in foreign language use in different contexts. Or another one, reflects on their own multilingual repertoire and that of others, in order to be aware of the role of language in communication, in a society, etc. And when it comes to culture, understanding of the content and context of, for instance, fiction, fictional sources in the foreign language, and relating it to their own context, but also experiences with other culture-related aspects in their daily lives and in the context of the language that they are learning. The challenges then for teachers are how to combine the goals from these three domains in the context of their pedagogies and by using the materials. This could be in a content-focused way, working towards a communicative outcome on these contents. But how can teachers, pre-service and in-service teachers, innovate their practices? For instance, what we try to do is to work on design-based research by experienced teachers, as for instance, those teachers who work on a PhD project, but also in task design and task implementation by pre-service teachers and in-service teachers together. And that's what we do from the teacher education programs and institutes. In order to work from an intended curriculum which proposes those goals to be reached, towards an implemented curriculum which develops the pedagogies and the materials that are needed to do so. The teacher's perceptions on these, the pupils' perceptions, and finally, to what extent those goals are reached, the attainment. This is what we're working on actually in our language pedagogy courses, in our teacher education programs. So in one of my courses, for instance, Talen curriculum, language curriculum, we have our students, we give them an orientation on what tasks are and what tasks can be. They then interview the supervising teachers in the school where they do their internship to identify challenges. We give them support with interview guidelines in order to focus on what is important in this respect. Then they develop tasks that relate to these new attainment goals. So based on the curriculum policy documents, and always in a combination with tasks with goals from the language domain and goals from the culture and or the language awareness domain. They develop and select design principles. They develop the tasks. They implement the task in their own internship practices, and they evaluate the success of their tasks. For the orientation, they make use, for instance, of the TBLT videos. They also make use of the language learning task bank. We have not uploaded tasks yet to this bank, but I think that is something we will definitely do next year with the new group of students. This is an example of the interview guideline that we use, and this is some questions that they can use in order to focus on the information that they need to get from the teachers, the experienced teachers in their practices, in order to prepare for the kind of tasks that they want to develop and implement. And these are the questions they discuss with their supervising teacher, their mentor teaching during the design stage. This is an example of one of my students from this year, Esmee Woltering. She started from two of the attainment goals with respect to language awareness and cultural awareness. The learner is aware about differences between, in this case, English and other languages, similarities and differences. And with respect to culture, the learner is aware about culture-specific aspects of English sources or other parts of the world where English is the language of communication. What she did was she developed a translation match activity. So she had the pupils translate song text, in this case, Dutch students who worked in a telecollaboration project with French students. The Dutch students translated parts of song text to English. The French students translated parts of French song text to English. And they made kind of a game in order to connect the translated song text to the original songs. And at the same time, they used this to an orientation to their favorite music from the Dutch context and from the French context. So that was definitely cultural aware. It was language aware when it came to what do we do to have a good translation that captures the gist of the colloquial language that is used in those song texts. And it had a gaming component. So then in the end product, it was not only the game, but it was also a discussion between the pupils, the French pupils and the Dutch pupils in their interaction. And they made a presentation about this interaction. So what attracted their attention in the interaction with respect to differences with language awareness, for instance. So an example of a task that takes into account the language, a cultural awareness, and the language awareness part. Teachers as researchers. So in most of these cases, teachers who have the chance to do a PhD research, many of them do work in the development of task-based language teaching, of task-supported language teaching. Development, implementers, sometimes in their own teaching context, in their own schools. Sometimes they work with a number of other schools where they do different kind of implementations. And they evaluate the task when it comes to how successful the teachers are, what the teachers' perceptions are, and what the students' learning results are. This is an example, I'm just giving a few examples now. Work by Silvia Canto. She developed telecollaboration tasks in a language learning program in which pupils from schools in the Netherlands work with pupils from schools in other parts of Europe using telecollaboration as a way to communicate. She developed a task design grid that was based on task-based design principles. And this is an example of a dialogue between students from the Netherlands and students from Spain. In this case, they worked in a tandem construction, so sometimes they communicated in Spanish, and in other tasks they communicated in English. And this was the communication in Spanish. And on the right-hand side, you see the transcription in English. And this is what she called an unplanned trigger. This was not the topic of the communication, but they had a chance in this case to discuss differences in lunchtime, and maybe also differences in what we offer for lunch, by the way. And this will be different for dinner. No worries about that. So this came up as one of the topics during this conversation that would never happen when you have a role play between Dutch students on, within the classroom. Another example, Linda Gijssen, who is also here, and she did her PhD on task engagement. And she developed 7 parameters of task performance for successful task completion. She also developed telecollaboration tasks in a virtual world in which pupils worked on task activities in which they collaborated, Dutch students with German students, using English as the lingua franca. And she studied what made a difference in the tasks in the success of the task completion by the students. For example, in this case, one of the topics was on waste avoidance and on pollution. And this also had a strong cultural connection in the daily life of the students and the difference and similarities in the context in the Netherlands and in Germany. Another one, Abid El-Majidi, 2022, his PhD thesis on debate as a tool for L2 learning. So he also designed principles, task-based principles in the context of debating and selected debating topics that are relevant in real life and were developed as debates within the English as a foreign language class. And this is an example of the debate text by one of the participants, which was then analyzed qualitatively, quantitatively on aspects of fluency, complexity, accuracy, and cohesion. Esther Schat, also 2022, did an intervention study in which she integrated language proficiency and intercultural literary competence, so part of the cultural awareness domain. She developed a model for intercultural literary competence based on dialogue with literature and dialogue about literature. And she studied based on easy reading novels for pupils in sexual education, for Spanish in this case, and the type of tasks that students performed with the content of these novels, connecting it to their own cultural background in order to work both on language proficiency, as we see here, on language proficiency, on their intercultural awareness, and on their literary competence. Another one, Christina Goodnight. She will defend her thesis next month. And this is a pre-copy of her book. And she studies how teachers develop competencies to support students in their speaking and interacting skills, making use of drama, improvisational drama techniques. And she's specifically interested in how teachers can develop their skills to do drama activities with their pupils in order to improve their speaking and interactional proficiency. So these are teachers who worked with whom she worked in order to work on those pedagogical drama techniques. One more, Kimberly Naber. She is doing research on the context of receptive multilingualism. And this is in the context of higher education, of the university, where we did a needs analysis for internationals who participate in meetings where the language, language of communication might be Dutch, but where is the tendency to switch to English as soon as there is a member who isn't able to follow the conversation in Dutch, the meeting in Dutch. Or there would be opportunities for translation and interpretation. But there are many internationals who are able somehow to understand Dutch, but to participate actively in English. And we have used this, and we did the needs analysis, we used this to develop a program that focuses on how can you develop your participatory body meeting related language proficiency in order to follow the meeting in Dutch and to participate productively in English. So this is a course that we developed from the intended level based on the needs analysis to the implemented level and to the attained level with respect to the success of these internationals in the multilingual context. As we missed some time in the beginning, I will give one example of CLIL, and then we go to the questions. Because also in the context of using language in other subjects, teachers need an awareness of how tasks can work in order to, at the same time, or in the first place, develop the understanding and insight into the subject knowledge, and in the second place, to develop the language that is needed to understand the topic and to discuss about the topic. I will go to an example now. The example of history teaching. Working with a history teacher educator, we focused on language and history subject. We did an observation and analysis of 40 CLIL history lessons and also 20 regular, that is, history lessons taught in Dutch in grade 7 and 9 in secondary education, with 8 teachers, with 3 raters for content and 3 raters for language. And we analyzed teacher-student interaction in Dutch and in the English taught classes. We made comparisons, and we also paid attention not only to the use of language, but also to the history topics that were addressed during those classes. For language, we focused on to what extent history teachers paid attention to exposure to input, to meaning-focused processing and form-focused processing, to output and interaction, and to the use of communication compensatory strategies. This is what we found on a 5-point scale. So lots of opportunities for rich exposure to history-related input, lots of meaning-focused processing and also support for that. Only very limited, almost absent form-focused processing in the context of history teaching. Some opportunities for output and interaction. From a TBLT perspective, I get a chance to give one example. We were interested in how do these teachers focus on meaning with respect to output and focus on form with respect to output. I'll skip this one. This is an example of a teacher having his students write arguments and statements, in this case, with respect to why eventually the Americans or the settlers won the independence war from the British. He had his students write their arguments on paper first and then see what he does, what happens.
This you give your body to go on the person to two places on the left, in circle, right circle. So you're going to do what you do. It's so then, and if you don't agree with one of these arguments or this idea, what you don't agree what your opinion is about it.
So they use each other's output as input with a focus on meaning in order to elaborate their thoughts on the topic, on the arguments of this subject. And then there is a second round.
This is wrong side.
Let's see if you can be an English teacher. A history teacher. Okay, apart from this, or within this, I must say, he all pays attention to all the core topics that were relevant for this history lesson. And there were no differences between teachers who taught in English or taught in Dutch with respect to the history lesson content and the history goals. So this teacher was very much able to combine content and language development within his lessons. I go to my last one. Back to Faris, because Faris is not only interested in becoming an ophthalmologist, he is also a football, a soccer fan. He had to prepare for a PE presentation about your favorite sport or your favorite sportsman or woman. And although he was a fan of Real Madrid and Cristiano Ronaldo, we didn't get a chance to get there, but we could go to FC Utrecht. We could watch football and discuss the rules in Dutch. And even so, there was a television documentary with very early images and video of Johan Graaff, when Johan Graaff was 16 years old, so his age, which we also watched together. And it was also a way of, well, real engagement in a task where we combined content and language. And I hope all teachers get chances to work with individual students or with groups of students to work on their challenges, their motivations, and their ambitions. And I think that is the way in which tasks can work and which we can challenge teachers to make tasks work and happen. Thank you very much.
Any burning questions, comments for Rick? For you, Arl. Yes.
No, you're fine. This is amazing when we listen and how inspiring and great. I want to share something that I had the chance to live because I think it was an experience for me as a teacher and a learner. And it was pretty challenging. I'm talking about, I was teaching for 7 years in China, Spanish, but not only the language, but mainly the Hispanic culture, linguistics, business. Then we went beyond the instrumental use of the language. Then I want to thank someone that is here, is Dr. Melissa Baralt, that she was the one doing the need analysis in that project. Because I think it was the perfect design that fit with your talk, and I thank you a lot for bringing that amazing examples of teachers and way of applying the TBLT, not only for teaching a language, but going beyond that. I love that idea of language literacy. Then I'm saying this because, for example, the point was that during the 3 first years, the students in China, they were learning Spanish with the professors who were in the university that we partnered with. But in the last year, when Florida International University was suddenly getting in the program, the students were learning Spanish culture, Latin American culture, Spanish for business, linguistics. Then it was the way to open a window to all what you were mentioning there. Then I had the chance to be teaching some of those courses. And it was an amazing experience because it was a way to really give the students to go beyond or to demonstrate them how important it is to learn a second language, in their case, a third language.
Yeah, and I think the ambition is to not only, because I think it's a very important example. The ambition is to not only do so in the, let's say, the final and 4th year, but to find opportunities from the very beginning to already use linguistic awareness and cultural awareness as core topics within a language proficiency program. And maybe not always exclusively using the target language, but then also using the other linguistic resources of the students in order to get involved in what it is to understand language and understand culture, and therefore better understand yourself in communication and society.
Yeah, thank you so much, because I think that it means a lot. I think it's about education. It's the concept. It's instruction or education. When we talk about education, it's a totally different point of view. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have to cut it short now because otherwise our dinner is getting cold, or so, I don't know. But thank you so much, Rick. And everyone who's walking, we find you downstairs at the main entrance of the university.
Zal hem even uitzetten of is de ding al uit? Oh, dankjewel. Ik dacht, ik nooit meer op jou.